Well, I don't actually have a title for the sermon today, but I have some thoughts, and I hope you have some thoughts as well. I've called it an interactive sermon. I guess I could call it interactive sermon number 1 or something. I don't know. We might do it again, we might not. It all depends on you and where your heart is and what you want to do. The first thing I would want to talk about a little bit is we've been talking about the spiritual gifts over the last little while. And when I looked at the next part of the passage, because we're in 1 Corinthians, when I looked at the next part of the passage, something stopped me and said, okay, I'm talking about this, but in order to grow, in order for the congregation to grow, people need to start talking about things. People need to start discussing. And I talked last week about how it would be good to start having a Bible study or some other group coming together, because I believe the congregation needs that in order to have the kind of community and connection with others where you can really grow. It's all well and good to come to church and, maybe I say some good things and maybe you're blessed and maybe there's some story I tell that you remember, and that's good. That's all valuable. But even more valuable than that is your own personal journey as individuals and the journey as a community of faith. And one of the things that's required is fellowship, coming together to share meals together, to share prayer times together, to share Bible study together. And I really believe that the Lord is calling this congregation, those that are here, in order to do that. I want to address just for a second about the individual. We've had some things going on in our lives as a family. I won't get into specific things or who it relates to, so I believe no details will be put forth. How about that? Does that sound good? No details? Excellent. But there's something that's come up over and over again. And that is maybe some people are doing some things that maybe we disagree with or certain people disagree with. And I've said over and over and over again, what matters is not what they're doing. What matters is our response. Where is our heart? What is it that we're doing? Are we blessing others when they're cursing us? Because it's all well and good to read verses in the Bible. And you can come Sunday after Sunday and hear the preacher talk about stuff and it's all good. And if you just go away and you don't practice it, or you don't have situations where somebody's really being nasty to you, and then you try to turn, that's the key element there, that you actually then try to turn the other cheek. You actually try to show love. And it's at that point we discover we don't really have a lot of love or compassion in us. It's at that point that our Christianity really hits the road. And so that requires us to grow as individuals, and it requires us to grow as a community. Communities must grow. So this community needs to grow in the sense that we're communing and that we're having fellowship and that we're connecting together. Are we? Well, there are many communities that are in serious trouble. Not just here, but I've heard some things last week about Canning and the trouble therein. I heard there's other issues in lots of other different congregations around. So the question is not what are others doing, or where are others as a group or community. And the question isn't where are others here, right? Where are they? It's where are we? Where am I? Where is the Lord taking me? And so I thought today we would have more of an interactive service, and I will let you know that it will not really pick you up, so don't worry about being recorded. I'm being recorded, but you won't necessarily be. We'll even cut some of those parts out. But you'll find that I will repeat the question. If you have a question, hopefully we do have one or two, then I will sort of repeat that and talk about that. So I want you to see, is there any questions to start? I want it to be interactive, right? I mean, because this is how we have to grow. And this is why smaller groups and connecting together is so critically important, because that's the point at which you can then start to ask questions and start to communicate with others and see people as they're operating in Jesus and pray for each other and so on. I'll just stop right there and see if there's any questions anybody thought about.
Well, I do have a question.
Yep.
I don't know whether I should ask.
That's the best kind of question to ask.
I'm curious to know why the CBC doesn't report things as maybe correct. I'd like to know.
You'd like to know what's going on with the CBC?
I want to know, yes. I've heard that it's maybe fake news, right?
Right.
And when I listen to the news, I listen to, I go to different sources, then I sort of have my own opinion.
Right.
But I want to know your opinion of the CBC. Like, why do you think it's fake?
Okay, yeah, and that's good because I have mentioned that a few times.
Yeah.
And you're like, why is he saying that? So,
Yeah,
and I wouldn't normally necessarily comment about certain things, except there is a spiritual connection to this stuff. And so one of the key things to understand is we often think of Marxism and socialism. So particularly if we look at the Soviet Union and what happened in China and what happened in Cambodia and so on, we think of it as against religion. But technically it wasn't really against religion as much as it wanted to put its own religion in. They basically didn't want the religions that were there. So in Russia, they really, really cracked down on the Orthodox Church, and they had KGB agents in churches, and people's names were written down, and you could just for preaching to people, you could go to the gulags and be sent away. So, and the same similar things in China and other places around the world. And so there is this idea that I think that people have that the socialism, or in particular Marxism, communism, is against religion. But I would argue that it is a that religion. So it has a certain belief structure. And so if you understand that there is a certain belief structure at the core of that, and then you begin to look at, well, how did that come into the West, and how did that sort of work into where we are today? I would conjecture, and I would also argue, because some people would say, well, it's just Marxism and so on. I would say, no, there's much more to it than that. I'm very simplifying it a lot, but there is a sense in which Marxism worked its way into the West. Some people call it cultural Marxism, and it did it in a way that we didn't see it. Like literally, we didn't see that this thing was happening. When I went to get my education degree in 1992-93. Now that's not yesterday. What are we talking? Three decades ago. 3 decades ago. And of all of the books that the author had, or that the teachers had given me, and they gave us a bunch of books to read for my education degree, there was one book that stood out like a sore thumb, and I was like, what is going on? What is up with this book? I know this is a long answer, but I'm going to get there. What is up with this book? It was by Paulo Freire. It was The Pedagogy of the Oppressed. And it was about South American peasants and the oppression, supposedly, that they were experiencing down in South America. And I'm like, how in the world does this have any connection to North America today? I completely dismissed it. I dismissed it because I thought, this makes no sense. Whole bunch of other people did not. They began to absorb these ideas. And he isn't the only source. There's a lot more going on. But ultimately what happened is it worked its way into the education systems, it worked its way into sociology, it worked its way into English and a whole bunch of other things, and then eventually began to work its way back into the culture. So where did the CBC go wrong? They had a whole bunch of people that were coming out of universities that have been steeped into this new religion that they didn't even know was a religion. They couldn't even quantify it. It's a whole oppressor-oppressed dynamic. That is the belief structure. And it seeped in. And you could say, oh, well, surely they would have noticed. I mean, surely people would have noticed. No, I didn't notice. When I took that course and had that book put in front of me, I rejected it and said, well, this makes no sense. This isn't reasonable. What I didn't do is I didn't look at the sources. Over half the sources were from Marxists and communists and from Lenin himself and Mao and from the Cuban dictator and from all of these high-level people who were truly believers in this religion of Marxism and socialism. And what happened was, I didn't realize it at the time, but that sort of worked its way in. So I'm really simplifying it, but this gives a base of it. And then that worked its way into the CBC. And so when I say that it's fake news is that it's presenting a particular religious viewpoint. That's why it's appropriate, I think, to talk about it in church. It's presenting a belief system that basically says this, if you really boil it down, the only way to look at the world is through the oppressor-oppressed dynamic, or as they would call it, the critical lens. So everything has to be viewed through a critical lens. And so what happened at the CBC, just as an example, there was a lady there, I heard her story, that was far left. If you go do the left-right thing, she was far left. Whenever an issue would come up, she would promote the I would say it's a progressive viewpoint. She would promote that progressive viewpoint, and she would be alone against most everybody else in her group, like as a reporter. They were all going, oh, well, you can't go that far, whatever. What happened over the course of about a year and a half is everybody went by her because the society said, we got to a tipping point where all of the people coming into these institutions, a lot of them from the universities, had so sort of pickled themselves or been so absorbed or baptized into this belief system that she was standing alone. The person who was the radical lefty, was a progressive, was alone saying, well, wait a minute, shouldn't we look at the other viewpoint now? And she was shunned. She ultimately had to leave. Why? Because the whole culture shifted. So at this point, and this is a really sad thing to say, if it comes from any news organization, CNN, CBC, CTV, Fox, I don't care who it is, I pretty much go, okay, I'm assuming it's wrong. I'm assuming that they're trying to tell me something that isn't true, and I need to go and look and see what the actual truth is. And I never personally would ever want to be there because I love the CBC as an example, and I think I've said this before. I absolutely enjoyed, as it happens on the radio, just tremendously. But the reality is that this belief system, and this is why it's important, this is why I kept talking about it, even though I know some of you as a congregation were like, why does he keep talking about that? I don't understand what that is. Well, the reality is it's another belief system, which I would even say it's an antichrist belief system. And you work that into the news organizations, and they basically say, well, the only people we promote are people that are in good groups, and we get rid of the people that are in bad groups. The only stories we talk about are the stories that promote our religious agenda. We don't talk about this, and we never keep anything balanced. Like we're always promoting and pushing this specific, and this is the key, it's a religious belief system. It isn't a one rogue reporter. It isn't one rogue person anywhere. It's an entire belief system that got put in over the course of a lot of years. And this is why the latest Google disaster, which I don't know if I mentioned previously about the Gemini AI program, where the fact that it's completely and totally racist against white people, like it just refuses to show white people anywhere. Why? Well, because this belief, it's not a rogue group within Google. This is a belief system that has worked its way in that basically says if you're a member of this group, you're good, and if you're a member of that group, you're bad, and there is no other way to look at it. You assume that belief from the beginning. That's a long-winded answer, but maybe that provided some, if you have a follow-up question or whatever.
No, I'm good.
You're good, okay. I either you're good or I talk so long, it's like, I don't want to get him started again.
Okay.
Yeah, and it took me a while to get to the point where I understood that we were talking about a belief system, and because I couldn't understand why people weren't seeing what I thought was just logical reasonableness. And then I finally got to the point where it was like, oh, okay, because this is not a thing based on facts, it's a thing based on belief. You accept, they even have the term for it. The term, in the black community, the term they came up with was woke. The term woke actually means that you wake up to the oppression that's all around you. It's basically your come to Jesus moment, except within the religion. You woke up to the fact or the belief that absolutely everything is a problem. That's what the word actually means. And so it's not based on a fact that you've discovered. It's based on a belief that you now believe that this is true and that there's systemic racism, systemic genderism, systemic transphobia everywhere. You just assume that by faith, and then you go look for it. So we assume this is true, and then we find the evidence, basically. That's a good question. Got me going. Any other questions? Spiritual gifts? Anything? I was thinking tongues might be a question because I know there's some churches that are split about that. Any questions you might have?
What is tongues?
Okay. There's been some argument. Thank you. What is tongues? There's been some arguments about that. So what we have is in Scripture, we have different times where tongues is mentioned. But starting at the day of Pentecost and other times, and Paul did lots of writing about it, and we've been reading about it, and so on. There is a sense in which sometimes it's talked about as it's other languages, and we know that at times certain people who are speaking in tongues, other people from other cultures or language groups could understand them, okay? So that the day of Pentecost is one example where they're speaking in another human language that we understand. And some churches and some people came to believe, well, that's all it is. It just simply means speaking another language. But there's so much evidence, especially in 1 Corinthians, about the fact that he's talking about how it's a heavenly language and how nobody will understand it and how the language is between you and God. So tongues, according to what we see in Scripture, can be you speaking in another language. That's only happened to me once, just so you know. Like that can happen, but most of the time it's it's a heavenly language. So it's not a language that's intelligible. That's why Paul kept going on. Remember in some of the things he kept saying over and over again? Basically, it doesn't do you any good to speak in tongues in the group because people can't understand you. You need to be prophesying, because prophecy is speaking in the language that people can understand, the truths that God has revealed to you in order to share and help them. So in other words, it's just a little, prophetic is a little, is strange because that's strange. It's different than tongues because tongues is a spiritual language. It's words that, doesn't necessarily make sense to the person. And that's also why Paul said, when you speak in tongues, pray that you would get interpretation. In other words, when you're speaking this heavenly language, and I forget which verse it is, Paul said, don't just do that. He says, don't just do that, but also pray that you would be able to have the interpretation, that you would be able to speak it out, right? So there's been conflict with regards to people, well, I don't know if I believe in it or I don't believe in it. Churches have split over this and all sorts of things have happened. But if we just look at Scripture, it's quite clear that occasionally tongues is a natural language, and in probably many, many other cases, or you could say most cases, it's a supernatural heavenly language which a person will speak to God. And the thing is that some people say, well, why would God do that? And I was having this conversation with my son the other day, and he said that last sermon helped him because God uses the foolish things to confound the wise. So there's something about us being willing to speak to God in a language that we don't completely understand that benefits us. And again, what we've been learning in Corinthians is the tongues for the church? No. Primarily, it's that you would be edified, that you would be built up. What's primarily for the congregation? That's prophecy. That's where I speak out a word and say this for this congregation. This is what the Lord is asking us to do. When you're writing a poem like you did, then you're operating in the prophetic. Like, to me, what really hits is when you say certain verses, and what happens to me is all of a sudden it's something snaps. It's like, okay, you put the words down, but in some way, it's God's Spirit working through you, and the prophetic comes into it and sort of speaks some truth out in a powerful way. You don't get that in tongues unless you have tongues and interpretation. Now, Baptists don't necessarily believe in that. The Pentecostals do. The Baptists don't believe in it enough, and the Pentecostals believe in it too much. The Pentecostals believe you're not really a Christian unless you have it, on which the Scripture completely disagrees with that. The Baptists go like, yeah, that's scary, we're staying away from it. So they don't believe in it enough, and they don't try to do it. So that would be my take on how some of the denominations think about it. Does that help at all? Yeah? Clarify a little bit? Yeah. Tongues is not like some things in Scripture where it's really not clear whether we should do it or is it a good idea. Paul is very, very clear. Yeah, I wish you all would do this more than me. Like, whatever, he goes on and on about how wonderful it is. At the same time, he keeps promoting the idea, look, seek the greater gifts. The whole congregation of Corinth got so wrapped up in tongues that they were ignoring the healing. They were ignoring the prophetic. They were ignoring the gifts of wisdom. He said, look, move on. You got to move on to the greater gifts. However, I would also say this, all the gifts are scary, right? And operating the gifts is scary. They all are. Like, there's not like, it's like, okay, give me that gift because it's safe. No, there's no safe gifts. I've got to tell you. I mean, I was we were having an alpha supper one time, and we were walking, I don't know if we were in line to get the meal or whatever it was, and the Holy Spirit said, tell the person next to you this. And I was like, I don't want to do that. I don't want to tell her that. Why would I tell her that? That's stupid. I don't say that. That's what I was thinking in my head. That's not a saying I ever use. Why would I say that? And then I felt the Spirit saying it again. Tell her this. It was a prophetic word. I was just not, I was scared. They're going to think I'm stupid. Like, I'm just going to say this out, and they're going to think, what are you telling me this for? And then I'll have no excuse because, like, I don't know why I'm saying it. I'm just getting this word. So I finally, after I think the third time, said, I hesitated. I said, does this mean anything to you? And I said the phrase. And she turned and she looked at me and she said, how did you know that? And I said, what do you mean? That's the saying my mother said to me when I was growing up. Like, that's what they said all the time. Why did you say that to me? I was like, well, because I felt the Spirit telling me to. So that's a scary thing to do it. It's a scary thing to do and it's a scary thing to experience because there's almost fear on her face. She's like, how did you know that? Where did that come from? How could you possibly know that? Well, I couldn't possibly know that. But if we're operating in the gifts and we're listening, I had basically a word of knowledge at that point and gave it out to her. So, yeah. That's a good question. Any more questions? We have time for another question. But this is good, right? And you see, growing individually, but then I'm really sensing that the congregation needs to say, okay, we're going to have fellowship, we're going to gather together. But I really feel that that's the only way forward. But any other questions? This is actually scary to do too, by the way. Right? I mean, it's much easier for me just to, I thought about that when I was just like, I said to myself, I was like, well, Michael, you could just create a sermon, relatively quickly, and it would be safe, and everybody would be comfortable, and then I wouldn't be up here going, what are they going to say? Like, what if they say this? Like, you know what I mean? It's not fun. It's not fun at all, but it is what it is. We must have one more. Gotta have one more. I know you actually have the questions. It's just like, I don't know if I want to say them.
Black Lives Matter.
Oh my soul, you love to hit them, don't you? What do you want to know about Black Lives Matter?
Well, I sort of think that it can be racist because it's not including
Right.
everybody. It's involving the black people, and I can see where maybe a white person may not get the same benefits as a black person sometimes. I say that because my daughter had to pay for her education,
Right.
and her friend who was black didn't pay a cent.
Didn't pay anything, yeah.
Okay?
Right.
And that's sort of, I think, discriminatory.
Right.
And I can see why people would say, would think that it could be racist. And then I think on the other flip side of that, yeah, the blacks have had it bad
Right.
in, southern states of the U.S. And some of that still goes on today. But for me, when I went to school in the 70s, all the blacks received a check every month. Well, I didn't get a check.
Right.
I have this.
Right. But see, if you have an issue with that, with BLM, Black Lives Matter, then what would come back is that you are the problem.
I know that's what they say.
Right.
So I'm
Right.
very careful where.
No, and as well you should be. Well, you should be.
And I don't, but I understand it to a point, and the same with First Nations. I have this
Right.
conflict, which is
Right.
pretty similar.
Okay.
I'm like, wow.
So I'm not gonna go to the Native thing. I'll just address the Black Lives Matter for a second. One of the things that you have to understand is that we're not dealing in the area of facts and reasonableness and logic anymore. And this comes back to the point that I made earlier, that what we're actually dealing with is a religion. And it has Marxist influence, but it also has Nazi influence. It also has postmodern influence. It also has romantic influence. It also has a whole bunch of philosophers that have influenced, including Rousseau and so on. So anything I say is going to be very simplified with regards to what's actually going on. But with regards to that, the stance that is reasonable is if you discriminate against anybody for any particular characteristic they can't change, color of skin or whatever, hair color, eye color, doesn't matter, then that is discriminatory, that is racist, and so on. That was what we all believed up until 5 minutes ago. But then it changed. And why did it change? It changed because the underlying religion says that's no longer true. The religion says that anybody in group A is good and holy and righteous, and anybody in group B is evil and a monster. And we don't get there by facts, we get there by faith. It's not about facts. So if you come up to somebody and say, well, wait a minute, how can this be fair if I won't use whites and so on, but group B is not getting this advantage, but group A is. How can that be fair? You can use facts and logic all you want, but we don't live in a liberal framework anymore. So I don't consider liberal a bad word. That's actually a good word. We have liberal conservatives and liberal progressives, but we don't live in a liberal world anymore where we're talking about facts and we're living now in a world where it's all about what the religion says. And the religion by default says this group is evil and this group is good, and then all we have to do is just cherry pick the evidence to go, well, we'll take this evidence here and we'll take that evidence over there, because we'll ignore that evidence because that doesn't support our belief system. But we'll take all this evidence over here. So a good example, actually, because you were sort of talking about it, is the issue of the people in the slaves in America and the terrible conditions that they had. Well, first of all, I would say that the slaves actually in the South United States versus somewhere out in Jamaica were much better off. When you got put on a sugar plantation, that was unbelievably brutal, which is not what happened in the South. So right off the bat, you start to have gradations in exactly, well, how bad was it? The other thing we have to understand is slavery is not something that was invented. So this belief system, there are literally people who believe that the colonists created slavery and that the only people that have ever been enslaved are the blacks in America. And then they believe that because of the system of the religion. The reality is everybody, everywhere, throughout time, in all cultures, North America, South America, they were brutal in South America and Central America, nasty. India, Africa, Asia, everywhere you could go around the world, as soon as we had groups that were large enough, societies that came together, they would begin to enslave neighboring societies. Africa was an unbelievable number, millions upon millions upon millions of people enslaved. So this is not the slavery, because this is one of the keys is, well, look at this great evil. Look at this great evil that's happened, so we need to fix it. No. Every single group throughout the world has experienced massive slavery and depravity, and all kinds of evil things have happened to them. There isn't any group that you can look at that hasn't invaded somebody else or been enslaved by somebody else. If you're alive today, if any of us is alive today, no matter what skin color or whatever, we only exist because some of our ancestors barely managed to escape the genocide, and others of our ancestors completely almost wiped out other groups. Basically, we're here because in our past, we have been through cultures that have either barely managed to hang on as their people were being massacred, or massacred the other group and wiped them out and killed them and slaves and so on. So it's not a pretty picture. So in coming back to your thing, is it fair? No, we should never be looking at somebody and saying, well, we're going to put this person ahead of this person based on the fact that they have blue eyes. So all blue-eyed people get a check or get what we should never do, because you can't stop. You can never get to the point where you can actually even figure it out, because we all have been enslaved in our past, and we all have been the genocidal maniacs in our past. I mean, the shock on I've seen some clips of people who, there was one very strong person believing in reparations. It was a black person in the States. I can't remember the name off the top of my head. Strong. They need to be paying me. These white people came over and they did this to us, until she had her DNA done. Come to find out, in her ancestry, some of her ancestors came over on the Mayflower. But it doesn't compute. She still thinks she should get paid because she just can't accept the fact that, no, it's always a much more convoluted and mixed message. So is it racist to promote one group over another, to hire one person over another based on their hair color, skin color, ear length, how tall they are, how short they are? Yeah, that's all 100% evil. It's not even a question. We should never be doing that. But we are doing it right now.
Yeah, we are.
And that is evil. It is unbelievably evil, right? We should be dealing with people as individuals. This is what Christianity brought about. I look at you and I go, well, I don't know who you are. I'm going to find out who you are. And based on what you can bring to the situation, if it's an employment or what your grades are, if you're going to school, I should be valuing you based as individuals, and we should all be treated the same. That's what we did until literally 2018 or something. At some point along in there, but just in the last few years, we dropped entirely the concept of we're trying to be fair. Now we're trying to be equitable. Well, that means unfair. That means unbalanced. That means we're not going to treat people equally. Well, the excuse is, well, they had it bad in the past.
Yeah,
We all had it bad in the past. Where's the name slave come from? I think I told you this the other week. It comes from the Slavs, who were white, who were basically wiped out and taken down into all of these other countries. They were preyed upon for centuries upon centuries. White people. And to the extent that everybody went, well, if somebody's a slave, that must mean they're a slave, they're a Slav. They're a Slav. Right? So anyway, so that would be my take on it. And I'm very concerned that we've moved away from liberal thinking, away from Christianity that says, I'm going to love everybody else and show grace and mercy and compassion. And we basically say, well, we're going to treat this person this way. And we're going to start segregating, like they've actually started to segregate groups in the States where these people get accommodations and these people don't. And like, that is a very dark and dangerous road. And I brought it up multiple times at the university and said, we're going down a very dangerous path. And I was told, no, we're not. It's all good. So, and you may have been told the same thing.
No.
I brought it up. I brought it up multiple times. Yeah. And there's just a sense of which, no, this is good. This is the right thing. And it's not. We should be treating everybody. Well, then the other argument that comes back is, well, yeah, but they don't have the same starting point. Nobody has the same starting point. Nobody, right? You come out. This guy happens to be tall. He's going to have some advantages because he's tall. He's going to have some disadvantages because he's tall. Nobody starts at the same level. But when we get away from the love and compassion of Jesus and we start viewing other people through racial and group eyes, we are in a very serious place, in my opinion. Those were two good questions. And again, I think it's a spiritual thing. I really do. I really think it's connected back to the concept that we're not treating everybody with love and compassion anymore. We've basically decided that certain groups of people deserve love and compassion and certain groups of people don't.
But has it not always been that way?
It has, but this religion, this is a good question. This religion has supercharged it to a huge extent. There's always been an issue between cultures. So we've always had tribal issues where tribe A, comes in and kills tribe B and so on. We've always had this issue. I think, and I had this discussion with my eldest son, I think the thing that supercharges it to a huge extent is the reason we're doing it now. Why? Because in the past, if you're attacking Group B, it's because Group B was terrible, right? If you're in part of Group A, Group B is terrible. They're monsters, and we would vilify them and do pictures of them and whatever. Like, we need to destroy them. But now it's like, well, we're doing this because we're compassionate. It's that added element of we're trying to be equitable. We're here. We're the good people. We're righteous. We're doing this for righteous reasons, which I think allows you to go much, much farther. It certainly allowed the communists to go farther, the Russians to go farther, the Nazis to go farther. It's all part of the same religion, and it's going to allow this to go a lot farther too. Why? Because the regions come down to this. Oh, well, we're doing this for righteousness' sake. And that, somehow, that concept of doing it because for good reasons really makes it bad. It really makes it evil, because then you can justify doing very wicked things to anybody else, and anybody that disagrees with what you're doing, and this happened in the communist states all the time. If you then start to question and say, wait a minute, should we be going this far? Then you're the evil one. We're doing this for righteous reasons. That must mean you're evil. If you're opposing us, therefore you get the gallows or get sent away. That's yeah. But that's a really good question because of the issues that we've had all the way along. But this, in my opinion, this religion of the oppressor-oppressed dynamic is supercharged that. And because I'm in the sessions where they keep telling us about how good and how righteous is, how good we're doing, this is going to be so good, we're making a better world, and blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, you people have no idea. No, you're not. No, this is not where we're going. This is a very dark place we're going. But in their heads, in their minds, they're doing it for the righteous cause. That's why the Nazi SS were able to do what they were able to do, because they were doing it for or what they believed were righteous reasons. That's why the communists were able to do what they did, because they believed they were doing it for righteous reasons. And if you don't have those righteous reasons to hang on to, you very quickly go, some of the people go, oh no, we can't do this.
And that's what Putin is doing today.
Putin, I haven't looked into Putin enough, but I would one thing I would say is I don't believe, and again this is somewhat limited, is that Putin is a communist. Which potentially could mean if we're getting our information about what he is from the Western media, it is highly likely that we are deceived. and that he's not nearly the monster that he's been portrayed to be. In fact, if you want to consider who's the person who started the war, where is this all going, we can take a look at the Americans that blew up the pipeline. We can look at the Americans that actively took out a leader that had been elected democratically in Ukraine and replaced it surreptitiously with somebody else. And we can say that the Russians had an agreement that the NATO would not expand any further, and the NATO expanded, and was then going to potentially expand into the Ukraine. And the Russians, basically, their backs were against the wall. Does that take away any evil things that he's done? No, but I haven't looked into it in great depth. But if you had to say to me at this point, who would you trust more, Putin or the U.S. State Department? I've got a real problem. I've got a real problem because they're pretending that this is a war that was just started by him. And to all intents and purposes, this is a war that was started by the U.S. And that's really, really serious. It was started by them because they wanted to keep pushing and want to continue it because the big companies want to sell arms. So the longer the war goes on, the more money they can make.
Yeah, I know that too.
Yeah.
But there's, I don't know.
Yeah. No.
It's a mess.
It's a mess, but at this point, wars end when people go, okay, we're just going to put a dividing line here, and we just need to stop for now. We need to stop killing each other. That's what we did in North-South Korea. It doesn't solve anything, but at least it stops the killing.
That's what it did.
Yeah, and I think probably the same thing should happen here. We just go, there's the line, we're done. We're not going to keep bombing each other because it's not helping. Because people are dying on both sides. It's not helping anybody.
There's no purpose. There's no greater good for anybody.
Right. Yeah. No, but that's a good question too, and it's a really interesting question again with regards to how can we believe our own news organizations? And if you're getting your information from them, I'm going like they're pretty much. Once in a while, the times I see that the CBC or some of these groups will actually tell the truth is when they're doing like a special interest story on elephants that that's had a baby in some zoo somewhere. They almost always will tell you the truth with some special little thing or some little race of tots that are racing little motorcycles around a track. Like some little special interest story, you will usually get what actually happened. If it's anything else, like the trucker convoy in Ottawa, if it's anything else, you are not being partially lied to, in my opinion, but looking at the information, you are being almost completely lied to. It's just really, really bad. So anyway, that's my take on it. We should be probably done. I don't know if there's somebody that has one more burning question. This is good, right? Did not go where I thought that it would necessarily, but to have conversation, and we can think of, wouldn't it be good to get together to have large, because this is how, we have conversations. You've got to have conversations. You've got to go there. Is there any other final one before are we good? It's not right. What? We hit the highlights today, baby. But yeah.
What would you say to people who are in marginalized communities who feel they were oppressed?
Right.
And who are, by what I'm gathering from what you're saying, being taken advantage of by this new religion because they feel like their whole life has been they haven't been treated fairly, they haven't been treated equally.
Right. So what I say to them? Well, first of all, you kind of alluded to it, the fact that this religion is the absolute worst for the groups that it's pretending it's helping. And that is really, that took me a long time to get to, because I was like, how does that actually work? But that's actually what's going on. The people that are being the most harmed, whatever of all the groups that you've got that are out there, marginalized groups, as you said, they are being destroyed by this religious thinking more than anybody else. And we can take one example. Let's just do one example real quick. Let's say that I get into university. And I get into university not based on the fact that I was able to write certain essays or get certain grades, but certainly based on certain immutable characteristics about me. When I get there, psychologically, it does something to me. Psychologically, I'm always going to think, well, am I here because of the fact that I can do it, or am I here because I've been given advantages? And everybody else around you begins to wonder, well, are they there because they can do it, or are they disadvantaged? Psychologically, it starts to eat away at people's brains. It starts to mess up their heads because all of a sudden we're not basing things on facts, on merit, on how we can do something that's something objective we can all look at. We're basing it off certain characteristics, which then starts to mess people up. That's a very minimal example, but it's the same thing in all these other areas. The other argument that I would have is, We are all part of marginalized groups. Every single one of them. There is no special group that's like, okay, this is the most marginalized. Like, and how would you even find that? The reality is, if you're here today in Scotts Bay, then you're part of a marginalized community that's been marginalized for a long time. Well, what do you mean? You guys only got internet in here just a little while ago. You guys were cut off from the outside. You were doing ships back and forth, didn't have doctors, didn't have access. This is a marginalized community. We need to stand up. Oh, do we? We all have issues. We all have trouble. We all have been part of groups that are oppressors and we're part of groups. So we can't look at that. That is never going to help us. So it doesn't limit that the harm exists. It basically says, yes, that harm exists, and so does all of this other harm. You can't be selective and say, well, these are the people who experienced harm. These people didn't experience harm. No, we all experienced harm. And therefore, since we've all experienced harm, all we can do moving forward is the Christian thing. And what's the Christian thing? Oh, heaven forbid. We have to ask forgiveness. We have to say, God, okay, I forgive them even though they've done something horrible to me.
That's another part of the problem, because the Christian thing isn't always the Christian thing. Christians have made mistakes too.
Right.
And they have messed up a lot of stuff.
Christians have messed up stuff, but have messed up, I would say, less stuff than almost any other group. So if let's say we think about slavery, for example, the reason that we have mostly freedom today, well, not, there's still groups of slavery, the people enslaved today. The reason we have so many people many are freed from slavery is directly related to Christianity. Now, were those people freed under the Roman religious system? No. Were they freed under the Greek system? No. Under the Mayan system and religious system? No. Under the Indian system? No. Under Confucianism? Under Buddhism? Under this? No. All of those cultures, there was no movement on the idea that we should ever free anybody. So if we want to get into this game of, well, the Christians did so many bad things, no. Yeah, did they do some bad things? Sure. But are they the ones that also then turned around and freed the people? And then and it was quite clear, Wilberforce and all the rest of them this was a holy cause. And they would basically say, the reason we want to do this is because God created all of these people and we shouldn't be discriminating against them. It's Christianity that did that. Did Christianity make some mistakes? Sure. Did Christianity do many amazing and wonderful things? Yes. Christianity's ledger, like if we're talking about ledgers, way better than every other religion. So the people that say Christianity is totally bad and there's nothing good about it, then that in my mind is like, okay, then you're a believer in this religion of hate. Like I get where you're coming from, because we always divide things down to this culture is good and this culture is bad. Colonialism, terrible. But only European colonialism? What about all of the other countries that invaded everybody else everywhere around the world throughout into the art history? Like, that's all we've done. Everywhere. South America, North America. But yet we're going to say this particular one is the worst? Like, or the only one that's evil? Like we're getting into some really interesting territory there, in my opinion. Yeah.
On an individual basis, though, there are people who claim to be Christian who cause people to be farther distance from Christ rather than
Yes.
closer to Christ.
Yeah.
And also on an individual basis, if someone feels they're marginalized, then they're hurting.
Yeah.
When they hear people talking about this, as if it's like a big group versus a big group,
Right.
they feel they don't fit anywhere.
Right.
They feel there's no grace. It doesn't feel like there's any grace.
Right. I would say this religion promotes the group concept, because that's, if you actually listen to, it's interesting how they'll twist the words. Anytime you bring up an individual case, very quickly it will immediately be shifted to the groups, because this religion believes in the groups. It doesn't believe in individuals. It's Christianity that believes in the individuals. So when you're in the territory of treating people as individuals and they have specific problems, Christianity is in your corner. But this religion doesn't want to go there, because and this is weird, but it literally doesn't believe that individuals exist, because it believes that individuals are an instantiation of the groups that they are part of. In other words, and this is weird, the only thing that actually matters is the group, and what doesn't matter is the individual, because the individual is a liberal Christian idea. And what they are totally focused on, and this is all they'll talk about pretty much, is, oh, well, this is going to harm people of X group, whatever that is. This is against X group. Notice they always talk about the group. They don't ever talk about specific individuals. They'll use specific cases to bolster their point of, so the group is being damaged and harmed. You're absolutely right. There's Christians that have done things that they shouldn't. and said that things that they shouldn't. I think to some extent, some of the people haven't realized what's really going on. So there's some people that don't have the empathy and the sympathy that they should to recognize what's going on, that we need to be treating people with compassion individually. But to some extent, I speak about the group part because that's how this religion thinks. And so I have to address that, because that is always, it's always the trans group, it's always the BIPOC, it's always the group. That's all that's talked about. And so in order to sort of deal with the situation, I have to kind of not play in their field, but understand it well enough so that I can go, okay, this is the way that they would go. The way I would go is, when I see you come in, then you're an individual, because that's what Christianity taught. That's what liberalism said. We need to focus on the individual and show grace and compassion to each one, that you should be free to do what you want within, it's not hurting other people and so on. So yeah, there's but that's liberalism. That ship has sailed. We're not in that country anymore. We're in a whole new world now. Yeah, and yeah, anyway, so I need to stop, so let's finish up. I hope that was a little bit helpful for some of you. And I won't be doing this every week, that's for sure. But it is interesting, I will tell you from my perspective, to have you give me questions that I didn't think you would give me, right? So I thought about a bunch of different questions. I think the only one that really was the tongues one was the one that I had kind of thought about, because that's what we've been sort of covering. But all those other questions, like I didn't prepare anything in advance, because I didn't think about it. So anyway, so I think they were good there. So let's do a hymn. Let's do a Victory in Jesus. Ooh, Maps and Songs book.